A Glance in the Mirror. Chapter 24. The World of Work. Terry joined the 1st Pinner Boys' Brigade Company in 1946. The company was based at the Methodist Church, becoming the highlight of young Terry's life. It was an opportunity for socialization with a mixed bunch of lads from many different locations in the local area under the leadership of Captain Leslie White, who formed the company just after the war. Terry went to gym classes, drill lessons, band and drill nights, attending church parades once a month. He attended camp and sat numerous badges. It was more stimulating than school, giving security, interest, hobbies, friends and social skills, and certainly better fitting than the Scouts. His great friend David Villiers was with him throughout all his school and Boys' Brigade days, from the age of 5 until 18. They were inseparable. They went to Lord's cricket ground every summer, watched the cricket in the park and took the scores in their wisdom books, camped out on Chorleywood Common in leaky tents, and walked back from church after visiting the tea shop from Northwood to North Harrow every weekend, forever discussing the war, the history of England, their castles and upkeep, defence and sieges. Every year the 1st Pinner Company spent a week camping at St Helens in the Isle of Wight. In the 50s the island ran a railway service all round the island. The train, built smaller than normal size, started off from Ryde Pier, where the paddle steamers tied up after their run from Portsmouth Harbour. The company arrived at Ryde Station from Waterloo, wearing their uniforms throughout the journey, which made them all very self-conscious. Still, they made a brave sight, marching up from St Helens Station with the bugle band in front, led by Captain White, to arrive at the field. This venue was the same every year. Professional cooks staffed the cookhouse while the boys had to peel the potatoes and do the washing up. Every day there were kit inspections, and the bell tent flaps brailed up, made ready for rounds. The Union Jack rose to the bugle call, blankets folded in true putter fashion, and kits laid out on the ground sheets. Palliasses were stuffed with straw, and tents carefully swept out, for woe betide any dropped points that meant not winning the trophy for best squad. It's difficult now to describe what all this meant to the boys and how seriously they took it. An inordinate amount of time was spent cleaning the equipment, the tent and the site. The tent lines had to be exact, and so too the kit for inspection. The bugle call perfectly played and the Union flag rose with the ceremony and pride. Prayers were said every day, and church parades an essential part of the week's proceedings. Every squad had to perform a special task and to provide part of the week's concert party. After arriving home, Terry was told about the possibility of a job in printing. In 1949, Terry's adopted aunt, who was working as a cook for Frank Oppenheimer, managing director of Chromoworks Limited. She overheard a conversation while she was serving dinner. It was about the problem the firm was having finding suitable apprentices. In their case, it was an apprentice in the artist studio. And this was during Terry's last year at school, when he was 14. She approached Frank Oppenheimer the next morning, telling him that she knew of a relative who was interested in drawing and painting, and could they apply for the position. He said they could, and asked her to get this young lad to submit some drawings. There was feverish haste to comply with the request to produce sufficient work for a portfolio. Albert was keen for Terry to leave school, impressing on him the need to pay his way by contributing towards the housekeeping. A letter was sent to the firm, and a date arranged to attend an interview with a portfolio of work. Albert and Terry went by train to Neasden, and then walked to the firm. The board of directors interviewed him and looked at his work. Terry was told what to expect, if accepted, and that he would hear from them in due course. Terry explained to the directors that he had won the school prize for technical drawing, and completed a watercolour picture of the school in company with Michael Gilbert. Thankfully, both achievements stood him in good stead, helping him to get the job and to provide a certain amount of personal satisfaction. It was as well that he kept a portfolio of his work, which came in very useful. Drawings, both freehand and technical, were his favourite subjects, which lasted all his life. He enjoyed the precision of constructing a worthwhile design and the challenge to produce complicated and detailed work. He realised early on that it was up to him to make a go of it, to make up for the lack of formal education and qualifications. A fortnight later, Terry received a letter telling him that he had been accepted, and that he was to report to Doughty Street, headquarters of the Institute of Printing in London, to sit an exam and take a medical. Fortunately, both of these he passed. This was accomplished in May 1949. 2 months later, he found himself accepted for an apprenticeship in the lithographic artist studio at Chromoworks Limited. But first, he must complete a 3-month probationary period and become accepted by the union. Terry started work immediately he left school, just before his 15th birthday. Industrial work, once mastered, was considered a skill that was to last a lifetime. That a person's job might not last a lifetime was not discussed, nor even thought about. That workers might have to retrain a number of times to adjust to industrial demands was never envisaged. Flexibility and an open mind to changing circumstances were not universal traits. This was not just the closed mind of Terry's parents, but national habits. People didn't readily accept new methods in the home or workplace. This made flexibility of thought, coping with the unexpected, hard to come to terms with. Terry entered the workplace totally ignorant about working practices and industrial relations. Bert generously paid for Terry's weekly train ticket, an action meant to demonstrate the confidence he had in his son's ability to hold down his first job. That first day, in early July 1950, saw Terry dodging in and out of the streams of workers down Station Road, Neasden, taking him away from the railway station, past the bombed-out sidings and goods yard that stretched as far as Wembley. The soot-blackened factory walls, hiding behind spear-headed railings, the endless rows of terraced Victorian villas bravely advancing upon the pavement, their geranium-filled window boxes trying to lend colourful distractions from the all-too-obvious bomb damage. A poster-hung hoarding exclaimed by stark design the virtues of Purcell's washing powder and Tetley's superior leaf, promoting a colourful plantation scene, gave colour and softened the aspect. Terry reached the factory gate. Peering out from behind the grill of a small inquiry hatch, a portly gatekeeper acknowledged his knock. He was attired in a brown patched warehouse coat, gripping a rolled-up cigarette between his few-stained teeth. He croaked to Gruff, "What you want?" Terry's fear returned. He thrust out his letter. Mr. Oppenheimer's elaborate hand graced the paper. Terry made his first utterances since leaving home. "Here, sir." The door opened, and he reluctantly squeezed in. His working life began. The gatekeeper showed him the clocking in procedure, having first found his card, then marched him down the long corridor which followed the whole length of the factory to the artist department. There a grey-painted sliding door opened onto a room furnished with 8 6 feet by 4 feet wooden tables, several racks of metal plates, and a small ante-room which contained the foreman's toilet and storeroom. This was to be his workplace for the next 7 years. These men were to make a great impression on him, more than any others in his life, their worldly understanding and opinions taken as sacrosanct. The gatekeeper introduced him to the foreman, Mr. Brian Porter, whom he had met at the interview. He in turn introduced him to Charlie Coburn, the eldest man in the room. Although past retirement age, had elected to stay on. At one time he had been the foreman. Reg Passy held the position of unpaid deputy, and Bruce Ormerod, the second eldest and the most irascible. Frank Clements, the socialist lettering artist, and finally Eric Campbell, the ex-apprentice, who had just served an extra year's apprenticeship to improve his skills. Terry was shown to an empty bench, his for the next 7 years. to the storeroom cupboard, his preserve above all else, and ceremoniously handed a warehouse coat. For his duties, Eric, being a most sensitive and industrious of fellows, explained his tasks. The first thing Terry had to do every morning was to mix up the drawing ink, using an enamel plate as the mixing container. He had to rub onto it a black greasy wax stick, and then by rubbing the tip of his middle finger over the applied wax, using water as the base, produce a lithographer's black drawing ink. Eric took him on a tour of the factory, to every department and workshop, introducing him to all the workers. The works employed 60% men. The remaining 40% were women, who occupied positions as sheet feeders or warehouse staff, box making, print finishing and packaging. Any man walking through these areas for the women would call out and barrack them. Men took great care not to linger. However, it was all in good fun and never got out of hand. If any of the machine minders became too fresh, they were soon slapped. The women sheep feeders who fed the paper into the grippers of the large machines worked on platforms above ground, and the men passing would make a grab for the leg, only to have their hands stood on. Mostly the machine minders were very protective of their women, so that they were hardly any problems. Chromoworks was a progressive general printers and an excellent place to start learning the business. Frank and Arthur Oppenheimer took a pride in producing a whole range of lithographic work, employing painters, carpenters, electricians, engineers and canteen workers to service their workers and machines, whilst supporting the various printing trades unions. Every day, along with hundreds of others, Terry joined the stream of workers marching up the platform stairs like the march of the troglodytes, past the booking hall out into the street, there to turn right onto the pavement leading down the hill past the railings, trying to walk on the pavement that was a feat in itself, ducking in and out, one foot in the gutter, the other on the curb, jostling with the rest of the early birds down the hill as the human tide surged about. Sheltering from the wind behind the hoardings, he strode on, past British Thompson Houston and Dallmeyer's optical works, through the alleyways to the printing factory. The Festival of Britain, held in 1951, was supposed to herald Britain's recovery. However, they still had enormous repayments to make to America. Lend-Lease, the Marshall Plan and the Berlin Airlift had to be paid for, a fact the media didn't explain clearly to the population. Britain was now broke and a second-class power, still operating as if nothing had changed. British industry in general still spent heavily on research and development. There was an overspill from the war effort, particularly into aircraft manufacture and allied industries, radio communications, radar and electronic engineering. The printing industry was controlled by the press barons who operated the letterpress side of the industry. Gradually, four-colour rotogravure raised its head as the Radio Times and women's weeklies began to surge ahead with massive print runs. It wasn't to be long before newspaper colour supplements started to test the three main printing systems to see if they could compete against each other, ultimately to bring about coloured newspaper pictures and the move to Wapping.